Dust devils danced across the parched land, mirroring the unease in June Delaney's heart. She stood on the porch of their small farmhouse, watching her husband, Thomas, mend a fence. Thomas was a gentle giant, his hands calloused but kind. They had carved out a simple life here, far from the bustling towns and the shadows of the past. Their days were filled with the rhythm of farm work, the scent of wildflowers, and the quiet joy of companionship. Evenings were spent on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, sharing stories and dreams. But a storm was brewing on the horizon. The railroad, snaking its way across the west, had its eyes on their land. Unpaid debts, they claimed, debts Thomas insisted were settled long ago. Letters arrived, each more threatening than the last. Then came the railroad men, their faces grim, their eyes cold. They offered a pittance for the land, an insult to the years of sweat and toil poured into it. Thomas refused. This land was their home, their future. He stood tall, defiant, a protector of what was rightfully theirs. June felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. She knew this wouldn't be the end of it. The railroad wanted their land, and they would stop at nothing to get it. The peaceful life they had built was about to be shattered. The peace didn't last. A week later, as Thomas rode into town for supplies, they were waiting. June had a bad feeling all day. She tried to dissuade him from going, but the flour bin was empty and the chickens needed feed. He kissed her forehead, promising to be back before sunset. The sound of gunfire shattered the afternoon calm. June ran towards town, her heart pounding in her chest, a silent scream building in her throat. She arrived to find a small crowd gathered, their faces grim. Her eyes scanned the scene, landing on a familiar figure lying still in the dirt. Thomas. His body was riddled with bullets. The railroad men stood nearby, their expressions cold and indifferent. They claimed he resisted arrest, a blatant lie. June knelt beside Thomas, cradling his head in her lap. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the sky. The warmth had already begun to fade. A railroad agent stepped forward, tossing a document onto Thomas's lifeless body. Eviction notice, he sneered. Property of the Central Pacific Railroad. June's world dissolved into a blur of grief and rage. The land, their life, everything they had worked for, stolen with a bullet. The injustice of it all was a crushing weight, suffocating her. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the dusty street, June made a silent vow. They would pay. The funeral was small, attended only by a few sympathetic neighbors. June stood dry-eyed, numb, as they lowered Thomas into the ground. Grief was a heavy cloak, but beneath it, a fire of resolve burned brighter. Back at the empty farmhouse, June began to pack. She couldn't stay here, not with the memories and the ever-present shadow of the railroad. As she rummaged through Thomas's belongings, a hidden compartment in his old trunk caught her eye. Inside, beneath layers of worn clothes, was a worn leather-bound journal and a gleaming revolver. The journal revealed a side of Thomas she never knew. He wrote of his past, a life he had left behind when he met her. He had been an outlaw, a member of a notorious gang known as the Blackjack Raiders. The journal detailed daring heists, narrow escapes, and the camaraderie he shared with his fellow outlaws. He had changed his name, seeking a peaceful life, a chance to atone for his past. The revolver, a Colt Peacemaker, felt heavy in her hand, a symbol of a life she never imagined she would embrace. But as she read Thomas's words, she understood. He had tried to escape his past, but it had found him anyway, and now it was her only weapon. The gentle farmer she loved was gone, replaced by a ghost of his former self. But the outlaw's spirit lived on, and June knew what she had to do. She would find the Blackjack Raiders. June stared at her reflection in the dusty mirror. The woman staring back was not the same woman who had planted wildflowers and baked bread. The soft lines of her face were hardening, etched with grief and determination. She strapped on the gun belt, the weight familiar and strangely comforting. The journal mentioned a hideout, a secluded canyon known as Blackjack Gulch, somewhere in the mountains north of town. It would be a long and dangerous journey, But June was undeterred. She packed what little supplies she had, a few clothes, some dried meat, and Thomas's journal. As she rode out of the farm, she paused, looking back at the empty house. It was a monument to a life that was no more. With a deep breath, she turned her horse north, towards the mountains. The sun beat down on her back, but the fire in her heart burned hotter. Finding the Blackjack Raiders wouldn't be easy. They were outlaws, after all, skilled at staying hidden. But June had something they didn't, a burning desire for justice in the name of their fallen comrade. She would use Thomas's memory as a beacon, guiding her through the wilderness and into the heart of the outlaw world. She was no longer June Delaney, the grieving widow. She was June, seeking vengeance, and she wouldn't rest until those responsible for Thomas's death were brought to justice. The transformation was complete. The journey to Blackjack Gulch was arduous. June navigated treacherous mountain passes, battled scorching heat, and slept under a canopy of stars, the vastness of the sky a constant reminder of her solitude. Finally, after days of relentless travel, she found it. A narrow canyon hidden deep within the mountains, its entrance concealed by a dense thicket of trees. As she approached the entrance, she could hear the faint sounds of laughter and music. She dismounted, drawing Thomas's revolver, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. She pushed through the thicket, emerging into a clearing where a group of men sat around a campfire, drinking and gambling. They were rough-looking, their faces weathered and scarred, but there was a camaraderie in their eyes that reminded her of Thomas's stories. "Hold it right there." June's voice was firm, surprising even herself. The men turned, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. A tall, grizzled man with a scar across his left eye stepped forward. "Who are you, and what do you want?" he growled. "I'm June Delaney," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm Thomas's wife." A hush fell over the camp. The men exchanged glances, a mixture of surprise and disbelief on their faces. The grizzled man lowered his hand. "Thomas? He said he was done with this life." June nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "He was, but the railroad took everything from us. They killed him." The grizzled man, who introduced himself as Cole, the leader of the Blackjack Raiders, listened intently as June recounted the events leading to Thomas's death. Initially, the gang was hesitant. They had left that life behind, seeking peace and anonymity. Risking everything for revenge seemed foolish, especially for a woman they barely knew. "We're sorry for your loss, ma'am," Cole said, his voice softening slightly. "But we can't just go riding into town, guns blazing. We'd be signing our own death warrants." June's eyes flashed with anger. "I'm not asking you to sign anything," she retorted. "I'm telling you what's going to happen. The railroad took my husband, my land, my life. They're not going to get away with it. I'm going after the man who signed the order, the one who made it all possible." She paused, her gaze sweeping across their faces. "Thomas was one of you. He was your brother. He would have done the same for any of you." A murmur rippled through the gang. Memories of Thomas, the loyal friend and skilled gunslinger, surfaced. Cole stepped forward again, his expression thoughtful. "What's your plan, June?" he asked. "We're not getting any younger, and the railroad has a lot of guns." June smiled, a flicker of her old self returning. "I have a plan," she said, "and it starts with robbing a train." The tide had turned. Their loyalty to Thomas and June's unwavering resolve had won them over. The next few days were spent meticulously planning the train robbery. June's quiet observation of the railroad's operations proved invaluable. She knew the train schedules, the security protocols, and the location of the key personnel. She explained how the train, carrying Harrison Blackwood, the railroad executive responsible for the land grab, will be passing through a narrow mountain pass on its way to the next major city. "The pass is our best chance," June explained, pointing to a map spread out on the dusty table. "It's a tight squeeze. The train will have to slow down. We can set up a roadblock, force it to stop." Cole, impressed by June's knowledge, assigned roles to each member of the gang. Some would handle the roadblock, others would secure the passengers, and a select few would assist June in finding Blackwood. June insisted on leading the charge. This was her fight, her revenge. She spent hours studying Blackwood's photograph, memorizing his features. She knew she would only have one chance. The plan was risky, but June was confident. She had the element of surprise, a loyal gang, and a burning desire for justice. As the sun set, casting long shadows across Blackjack Gulch, the gang prepared for their mission. They checked their weapons, sharpened their knives, and said silent prayers. By dawn, they would be facing the railroad, ready to take back what was rightfully theirs. June, armed with Thomas's revolver and a heart full of vengeance, was ready to lead the charge. As dawn broke, the Blackjack Raiders were in position. The mountain pass echoed with the rumble of the approaching train. June, her face hidden behind a bandana, gripped Thomas's revolver, her knuckles white. The train rounded the bend, its whistle screaming, and the gang sprang into action. A carefully placed pile of rocks blocked the tracks. The engineers slammed on the brakes, the train screeching to a halt just inches from the obstruction. The gang, guns drawn, swarmed the train. Cole and a few others secured the passengers, ordering them to remain calm and hand over their valuables. June, along with two of the raiders, moved through the train, searching for Blackwood. Chaos reigned. Passengers screamed, guards fired their weapons, and the air filled with the smell of gunpowder. June kicked open the door to each compartment, her eyes scanning for the familiar face from the photograph. She found him in a luxurious private car, sipping brandy and reading a newspaper. Blackwood looked up, startled, his eyes widening in fear as he saw June standing before him, revolver raised. "Who are you?" he stammered. "My name is June Delaney," she said, her voice cold and unwavering. "And you're about to pay for what you did to my husband." The robbery was underway, a whirlwind of action and adrenaline, and June was at the center of it all, her confidence growing with each passing moment. She was no longer just a widow seeking revenge. She was a force to be reckoned with. Blackwood's face paled. He recognized the name, the farm, the eviction notice he had signed without a second thought. I had no idea," he stammered, his voice trembling. "It was just business." "Business?" June's voice dripped with sarcasm. "My husband is dead because of your business." She raised the revolver, her finger tightening on the trigger. The sound of gunfire and screams outside faded into the background. In that moment, it was just her and Blackwood, the scales of justice hanging precariously in the balance. "Please," Blackwood pleaded, his eyes wide with terror. "I'll give you anything. Money, land, anything you want." "I don't want your money," June said, her voice unwavering. "I want justice. I want you to understand the pain you've caused." She lowered the revolver slightly, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. Killing him would be easy, but would it bring Thomas back? Would it truly ease her pain? Suddenly, a gunshot rang out from outside the car. The train lurched violently, throwing June off balance. The railroad guards had regrouped and were launching a counterattack. The moment of truth had arrived, and June had to decide: kill Blackwood and satisfy her thirst for revenge, or find another way to make him pay. The chaos outside was escalating, and time was running out. She had a choice to make, a choice that would define the rest of her life. Ignoring Blackwood's pleas, June burst out of the train car, finding the Blackjack Raiders engaged in a fierce firefight with the railroad security forces. Bullets whizzed through the air, ricocheting off the train cars. Cole yelled, "June, get Blackwood and let's get out of here." But June had other plans. She pushed past Cole, taking cover behind a stack of crates. She assessed the situation, her eyes scanning the battlefield. The railroad guards were heavily armed and well-organized, but the Blackjack Raiders were holding their own, their years of experience evident in their every move. June raised Thomas's revolver, taking aim at a guard who was about to shoot Cole in the back. Her shot was true, the guard falling to the ground with a thud. Another guard appeared, firing wildly. June calmly reloaded, taking aim once more. Her sharp shooting skills, honed from years of hunting on the farm, were now being used for a far different purpose. The tide of the battle began to turn. June's accurate shots picked off the guards one by one, giving the Blackjack Raiders the upper hand. The remaining guards, realizing they were outmatched, began to retreat. Cole, seeing the opportunity, rallied the gang, pushing the remaining security forces back into the train. The shootout was intense and chaotic, a whirlwind of gunfire and desperation. June, however, remained calm and focused, her every shot finding its mark. The woman who had once planted wildflowers was now a deadly force, a sharpshooter capable of turning the tide of battle. With the railroad guards subdued, June returned to Blackwood's private car, finding him huddled in a corner, trembling with fear. The shootout had shaken him, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. June pointed the revolver at him once more, the decision weighing heavily on her heart. "It's over, Blackwood," she said, her voice laced with weariness. "You're going to pay for what you did." But as she looked into his eyes, she saw not just fear, but also a flicker of something else. Regret? Could this man, responsible for so much pain, truly feel remorse? The thought gave her pause. Killing him would be easy, a swift and decisive act of revenge. But would it truly bring her peace? Or would it simply make her a killer, no better than the men who had murdered Thomas? The faces of the passengers, their lives disrupted by the robbery, flashed through her mind. The faces of the blackjack raiders, men trying to escape their past, now drawn back into violence. Was this the path she wanted to take? Was this the legacy she wanted to leave behind? June lowered the revolver, her hand trembling. "I'm not going to kill you, Blackwood," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But you're not going to get away with this." She had made her decision. Revenge wouldn't bring Thomas back, but justice might offer some semblance of closure. The internal battle had been fought, and June had chosen a different path. June's decision solidified her transformation. She was no longer the naive farm wife, nor was she a cold-blooded killer. She had found a middle ground, a way to honor Thomas's memory without sacrificing her own soul. She would expose Blackwood's crimes, bringing him to justice through legal means, even if it meant facing the powerful railroad. She instructed the blackjack raiders to tie up Blackwood and leave him for the authorities, along with a detailed account of his crimes and the railroad's corrupt practices. She knew it was a gamble, but she had faith that the truth would prevail. As the gang prepared to leave, Cole approached June, a mixture of respect and admiration in his eyes. "You're a strong woman, June," he said. "Thomas will be proud." June managed a weak smile. "I hope so, Cole. I hope so." She mounted her horse, taking one last look at the train, a symbol of the injustice she had fought against. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but June was ready. She had found her purpose, her path, and she wouldn't rest until Blackwood and the railroad were held accountable for their actions. Her transformation was complete, from grieving widow to determined seeker of justice. The sun rose higher in the sky, casting a long shadow behind her as she rode away, leaving the chaos and violence behind. A new chapter was beginning. June and the blackjack raiders rode hard through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the train. The railroad would be furious, their security compromised, their executive humiliated. The news of the robbery would spread like wildfire, further tarnishing their reputation. As they reached Blackjack Gulch, a sense of exhaustion settled over the gang. They had risked everything for June, for Thomas, for a cause they believed in. The victory, however, felt bittersweet. They had achieved their immediate goal, but the fight was far from over. Sitting by the campfire, June reflected on her journey. She had started as a grieving widow, seeking only revenge. But she had learned that revenge was a hollow victory, that true justice lay in exposing the truth and holding those responsible accountable. The price of her transformation had been high. The loss of her innocence, the embrace of violence, the constant threat of danger. She looked at the faces of the blackjack raiders, men who had also paid a price for their choices. They were outlaws, yes, but they were also loyal, brave, and capable of redemption. Could they find a new path, a way to use their skills for good? The question lingered in her mind, a challenge for the future. The railroad was in disarray, Blackwood was in custody, but June's journey was far from over. She had planted the seeds of justice, and now She had to wait and see if they would bloom. The next morning, June gathered the Blackjack Raiders. The sun streamed through the canyon, illuminating their weathered faces. "What are we going to do now?" Cole asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. June looked at each of them, seeing the potential for a different life, a life beyond outlaws and train robberies. "That's up to each of you," she said. "We can continue down this path, living on the run, always looking over our shoulders. Or we can find a new way." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the canyon. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I can't go back to the way things were. Thomas is gone, and my old life is gone with him." She looked at Cole. "I'm going to stay and make sure Blackwood is brought to justice and that his crimes are brought to light. It is up to you what happens next." A glimmer of hope flickered in Cole's eyes. "Maybe it's time for a change," he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. The other raiders nodded in agreement. The choice was theirs, a chance to leave the outlaw life behind and forge a new destiny. As June watched them, she knew that whatever they decided, they would always be bound together by their shared experience, by the memory of Thomas, and by the fight for justice. The ending was not written, but a new beginning was on the horizon. They could choose a new future.